Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, I've got a special treat for you, a recap of the movie John Wick Chapter 1. Spoilers ahead. Be prepared, watch out, and take care. John Wick emerged from his car badly injured, appearing as though he had just engaged in a violent altercation. He reached into his pocket and retrieved his mobile phone, gazing at treasured photos of his dear wife. However, the weight of his injuries and emotional turmoil proved too much to bear, and John Wick collapsed onto the ground in a faint. Following this, the scene transitions to a few days earlier where John can be seen in the hospital with his beloved wife, Helen. Unfortunately, Helen's illness had taken a turn for the worse, and she eventually passed away, leaving John alone and grieving. Overcome with sorrow, John took it upon himself to perform the last rites for his departed spouse. At the funeral, John was visited by a man named Marcus, who came to pay his respects. However, John was still reeling from the loss of his wife and remained visibly distraught. As it turns out, Marcus was once John's closest friend, and he offered his heartfelt condolences at the funeral. "I'm truly sorry for your loss," he said, acknowledging the profound impact of Helen's death on John. "I know you're feeling broken right now, but you must summon the courage to carry on and move forward on your own." Despite the comforting words from his old friend, John remained inconsolable, struggling to come to terms with his wife's passing. After their conversation, John returned home to find that someone was at his door. He answered it to discover a package addressed to him. Upon opening the parcel, John learned that it had been sent by his wife before she passed away. Inside, there was a box and a letter written by Helen. In the letter, she expressed her understanding that John would feel alone after her death and that she didn't want him to be completely broken without her. To fill the void she would leave behind, she had sent him a new companion named Daisy. In the letter, Helen expressed hope that John and Daisy would take good care of each other and find comfort in each other's company in the future. As John read the letter, tears welled up in his eyes. He had loved his wife deeply, and the mere thought of her passing had shattered him. In the days that followed, John and Daisy became the best of friends, spending countless hours together. One day, John took his car out for a spin and stopped at a petrol station to fill up his tank. It was there that he encountered a boy named Joseph, who spoke to him in a rude manner and asked if he would be willing to sell his car. An offended John responded in kind, refusing to part with his beloved vehicle. Feeling insulted, Joseph was on the verge of picking a fight with John, but his friend stepped in and prevented him from doing so. Eventually, John left the petrol station, still seething from the encounter with Joseph. Later that night, John was sound asleep when he was suddenly awakened by Daisy's persistent barking. Sensing something was amiss, he got out of bed and went to investigate. To his horror, he saw Lucifer and his accomplice attempting to steal his beloved car. Without warning, the two men attacked John, viciously beating him even though he was in no condition to fight back. Despite his injuries, John valiantly tried to defend himself, but he was no match for the two attackers. In a cruel and heartless act, Lucifer snatched the car keys from John and callously killed Daisy before fleeing the scene. He found Daisy lying lifeless in front of him, her innocent and loyal eyes forever closed. The sight of his beloved pet's lifeless body filled John with immense sadness and anger. John was overwhelmed with grief and sadness following the death of his beloved Daisy. She was the last remaining connection he had to his late wife, and the loss of her was almost too much for him to bear. With great effort, John composed himself and gave Daisy a proper burial in the ground. He then set about cleaning the blood that had been spilled in his home, all the while reminiscing about the memories he had shared with Daisy and his wife. Meanwhile, Lucifer arrived at Aurelio's garage with John's stolen car. He instructed Aurelio to change the car's license plates and falsify the documents. However, Aurelio immediately recognized the car and knew it belonged to John, a longtime acquaintance of his. He confronted Joseph, demanding to know how he had come into possession of the stolen vehicle. Lucifer admits to stealing the car from a man's home, where they beat the man, killed his dog, and stole the car. Aurelio, upon hearing this, orders Lucif to leave the garage and punches him in anger. In retaliation, Lucif's men point their guns at Aurelio. Unfazed, Aurelio warns them that they have no idea who they are messing with. After some time, John visits Aurelio's shop to inquire about his stolen car. As Aurelio sells stolen cars at his shop, John suspects that his car might have been sold there. Upon asking about his car, Aurelio tells John that a boy named Joseph had brought the car to him, asking to change the number plate and the papers. However, Aurelio recognized the car and drove them away from the shop. Afterwards, Vigo asks Aurelio if he knows who John Wick is. Aurelio confirms that John is the same man whose car was stolen by Vigo's son. Vigo is taken aback at the mention of John's name, as he knows who John is and what he's capable of. Vigo questions his son about the stolen car, and Lucif admits to stealing it. Vigo pinches his son and demands to know whose car he stole. When his son responds that it was just a car, Vigo reveals that it belonged to John Wick, a legendary killer known as the Boogeyman. Those who hunt John Wick are met with deadly force, and Vigo knows that his son has brought trouble upon them by stealing from John. John is a notorious assassin feared by all, and you stole his car. He has eliminated numerous boogeymen. Vigo reveals that John used to work for him in the past, and he didn't need any weapon to kill. He could turn anything into his weapon. However, he fell in love with a girl named Helen during a mission and left his career as an assassin. Helen gifted him a dog before her death, which you killed. Therefore, John will come after you. Luce starts to feel scared, but Vigo reassures him, saying he will do anything to protect his son. Afterward, we see John entering the basement with a hammer. He starts breaking the floor and retrieves a suitcase from within it. The suitcase contains guns and a large number of gold coins. Meanwhile, Vigo calls John and pleads with him to forgive his son for killing his dog. However, John hangs up the call without giving any response. After realizing that John will not forgive his son's actions, Vigo decides to eliminate John to protect his son. He dispatches a group of his men to John's house to kill him. However, as Vigo had warned, John is a legendary assassin and manages to kill all of Vigo's men one by one. After the killings, John calls for someone to come and clean up the crime scene. Some people arrive and dispose of the bodies, as it is their profession to do so. In return for their services, John pays them with one of his gold coins instead of offering them a dead body as payment. Next day, Vigo meets with Marcus and offers him a large sum of money to kill John, knowing that Marcus is also a skilled assassin like John. Marcus ultimately accepts Vigo's offer. Meanwhile, we see John approaching a hotel named Continental. The unique aspect of this hotel is that it serves as a meeting place for the most powerful mafia members in the world. However, it is governed by strict rules, and even the most prominent members cannot engage in activities such as shooting, killing, or robbing. These regulations are strictly enforced, and anyone who violates them is dealt with severely. Despite this, John decides to book a room at the Continental to carry out his mission. John Wick arrives at the hotel and sees a girl named Perkins. He later meets Winston, the owner of the hotel, who is surprised to see him since he thought John had stopped killing. John tells Winston his story, and he gives John the address of the hotel where Lucif is staying. John prepares himself and leaves for the hotel. John's fighting skills were so exceptional that he was able to defeat all of Lucif's men. Everyone present there was frightened by John's ferocity. However, Lucif managed to escape. Later that night, while John was sleeping in his hotel room, Perkins arrived and started shooting at him. Perkins had been hired by Vigo to kill John, but John was able to capture Perkins and interrogated her about Lucif's whereabouts. Despite being held captive, Perkins claimed that she didn't know where Lucif was. After obtaining the information from Perkins, John demands to know something new about Vigo to spare her life. She eventually discloses the location of a church where Vigo has stashed a considerable amount of money. Following hardship, John kills Perkins and heads to the church. On his arrival, he engages in a fierce battle with Vigo's men, taking them out one by one. After setting all of Vigo's money on fire, John makes his way out of the church. He anticipated that Vigo would come to check on his money, and sure enough, Vigo arrives at the scene. As John starts to attack Vigo and his men, a car suddenly hits him and he falls unconscious. When he wakes up, he finds himself surrounded by Vigo's men, with Vigo standing right in front of him. Vigo confronts John, acknowledging that he is still the same as he was before. However, he tells John that that burning his money was a mistake as there were important documents inside that would have allowed him to become the biggest mafia in the underworld. Vigo doesn't care about the money itself, but rather the lost opportunity. Vigo tells John that despite everything that has happened, he is willing to forgive him if he agrees to stop going after his son. John refuses, saying that Vigo's son took away something very precious from him, and he cannot just let it go. In response, Vigo orders his men to kill John. As John is being beaten, someone starts firing at Vigo's men and killing them one by one. It turns out to be John's best friend Marcus, who has come to help him. Together, they fight off Vigo's men. John reaches Luce's location and makes a spectacular entry by taking out all the security first and then killing Luce himself. Meanwhile, Vigo finds out about his son's death and becomes furious. He orders his remaining men to attack John, but John manages to defeat all of them. In the end, John confronts Vigo and forces him to reveal the location of his son. Vigo had anticipated that his son's location was heavily guarded, but John surprises him once again by taking out all the security and killing Luce. Vigo is left angry and helpless as he watches his empire crumble before him. Vigo unleashes his fury by brutally beating Marcus, John's best friend. He then calls John and taunts him about it, revealing that he has placed Marcus's dead body in John's house. John rushes to his home and finds his friend's lifeless body, feeling a deep sense of sorrow and rage towards Vigo. Vigo anticipated that John would seek revenge for Marcus's death and decided to leave the city to avoid it. However, Winston, who had insider information on the gangsters, informed John of Vigo's location. With the address in hand, John set out to pursue Vigo. He eventually caught up to him, causing his car to crash and fall off a bridge. Before this, John had already eliminated all of Vigo's men. Eventually, John locates Vigo and engages in a brutal fight with him. Despite Vigo's attempts to escape, John finally kills him, but not without sustaining serious injuries. To heal himself, John retreats to a nearby farmhouse where he injects himself with medicine. While recovering, he notices a puppy nearby and decides to adopt it. The movie ends with John leaving the farmhouse with his newly adopted puppy, concluding the story of John Wick Chapter 1. Thank you for joining us into our review. We hope you had as much fun watching it as we did breaking it down for you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a video from us.